Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee at East Cambridgeshire District Council. I would particularly like to welcome those members of the public and press watching on the live stream. As with all technology, there's always the danger of something going wrong with the live stream. If anything should go wrong, I will need to adjourn the meeting until the issue has been resolved. If we are unable to resolve the issue, it will be necessary to postpone the rest of the meeting. Brings us on to agenda item 1, public question time. Do we have any public questions?
No, there's no public questions, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. Jane, back over to you again. Apologies and substitutions. I can see we've got a full house.
Apologies.
Item 3 is declarations of interest. Does any member have any interest to declare for any items on the agenda? Item 4 is the minutes. To approve the minutes of our meeting held on the 19th of March. Can I have a proposer for that?
I'd like to propose that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Organ, and on the chair I will second them and sign them at the end of the meeting. Brings us on to item 5, which is Chair's announcements. 2 announcements today. Firstly, I would warmly like to welcome Stephen Joyce, our newly appointed lay member to the committee. Stephen, would you like to sort of introduce yourself? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Absolutely delighted to join the committee. By way of brief background, about 10 days ago, I retired from full-time professional employment as a finance director in the charity sector, most recently with the Royal Society of Chemistry. But prior to that, I had about 10 years as a Section 151 officer in 2 different district councils, one in Suffolk, one in Essex. I'm a resident of the district, been in the district for about 25 years, and since 2001, resident of Wycombe, beautiful part of the district. And I'm looking forward very much to making a contribution to the committee's work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Secondly, it has been necessary to change the date of our next meeting, and that will now take place on Tuesday, the 5th of November. And that concludes Chair's announcements. Brings us on to agenda item number 6, External Audit Interim Value for Money Report 2022-23. I'd like to welcome Mark Hodgson and his team from our external auditors, EY. Mark, before I ask you to introduce this report, can I also ask you that at some stage you can give the committee an update, if there is any update, you have on clearing the backlog of audits across the country? Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you for that introduction. Yes, I have 2 of our summer interns with me, shadowing me today. This would be a good example of a committee and what real life looks like. So all questions to them. So I thought I'd set out the context, as you say, first, because it then leads into the 2 agenda items that we've got. So kind of following the last committee meeting, the 3 consultations that I talked about were published and the consultation period was held. So there was one by the National Audit Office on changes to the code, one by the then department, so DLUC, on a backstop timetable, and then the 3rd one by SIPFA on changes to the financial reporting framework. So all of those consultations ran, and it was then envisaged that legislation would be laid enabling the backstop as per the consultations, with a backstop date of the 30th of September. Now, getting to the point that the legislation was ready took a little bit longer, I think, than envisaged. And just as it was about to be laid, the general election was called, which kind of put a halt to all proceedings for PERDA. And then clearly we come to now the end of the general election, a new party being in charge and limited parliamentary time before summer recess, and clearly a previous party writing the ministerial legislation from which that would have gone through, although we understand there was at that time pan-party support for it. So there is no formal further guidance that has come out. Everybody's kind of in a holding pattern awaiting that, but we do understand that it is on the new minister's urgent item to address, but no indication that any strategic approaches should change. So we are not deeming to change our approach to 23-24 audits. And we haven't heard or been given any guidance that the proposals for the backstop date would be scrapped, and therefore the ability to close out historic audits as we've previously discussed. So our plan to do all value for money work through to 22-23 still stands, which is why you've got the interim report on today's agenda, which I'll talk you through, going into 23-24 full audit, which is why you've got the audit plan for that. So that's kind of the wraparound context. I think I'm happy to just pause for a minute and just see if there are any questions coming out of that, because the context is important for the two reports.
Thanks for that introduction, Mark. Members, any, that was very clear to me. I mean, it's about clear as mud as to when the official announcements will be made, if ever. Thanks. Stephen.
Not really a question, Chair, but in terms of onward messaging from this committee, I imagine it would be helpful for the council to hear from us that this is an unsatisfactory situation, but it's beyond our direct control to influence it, and all councils are in the same boat. So whether that be a helpful thing for us to communicate, I'm not sure. But in terms of the update we've had from Mark, I think that's very clear. So all good.
Okay.
Thank you. So on to agenda item on our interim value for money report. So the background is, as I said, our approach is to discharge our responsibilities for all years through to 22-23 for value for money work in relation to our code of responsibilities, and for you that is only 22-23 audit year. You only have that 1 year that is outstanding. So in front of you, you have that interim report. It is interim because technically under the code, you have to revise and review the arrangements in place up to the date that you sign. So it's a live piece of work, so it won't be finalised until the point at which we issue the opinion in whatever form that is over the 22-23, although it is very rare for things to come up that impact a backward-looking year, though it can happen. So that's why it's badged as interim today. So on page 6 of our report, at the planning stage, we did identify one risk of weakness, and that's in relation to the governance criteria, and that is purely because the 22-23 draft accounts were published later than the deadline set in the accounts and audit regulations, being just under 4 months after that date. Now, that is a risk that arrangements at the council could be weak. It is not a statement that they are weak, but it then directs your work. So page 7 then sets out the work that we did, and following that work, we haven't identified any significant weaknesses in the council's arrangements. So in relation to the risk that we did identify, we considered the council's rationale for the publication date of the draft 22-23 statements. We noted that a full notice was published on the 31st of May with the reasons for the delay, and the reason for the delay being that the prior year audit had not yet closed through to that date. Now, that's an entirely plausible, reasonable approach to take, given that we issued our audit opinion on 21-22 on the 19th of July 23. Then my next consideration was, then did the council publish the draft accounts in a reasonable period of time after our audit opinion on the prior year was issued? And clearly within a 2-month window, I deem that to be reasonable, because the window from the 31st of March to the 31st of May is equally 2 months. It seems like the time frame had been moved for a wholly reasonable reason. So then we don't have any other significant risks, which I think was good news for you as a committee and as a council. And then pages 10 to 12 set out that summary for the arrangements in the year, which pick out primarily around how we addressed that potential risk of weakness. And then Appendix A just updates the underlying arrangements that we had in our previous auditor's annual letter for the in-year changes to give you a baseline arrangements going forward, which you'll see move on through further years. So that's the high-level overview. Happy to take questions.
Members, any questions on the interim value for money report? Stephen?
Yeah, thank you for the sort of good and clear report. I have 2 questions on the financial sustainability part of the report, starting on page 14 and 15. of your report. It's page 28, 29 in our pack. So I note there are no significant risks or weaknesses, which is good to hear. First question is the commentary about the use of reserves to balance the budget. To me, financial sustainability is about something a bit longer term than the next year or two, maybe 3, 5, even 10 years. And using reserves to balance the budget is not necessarily a sustainable approach. And so I'd be grateful for your view on that, and to what extent you'd be expecting the council to be working towards like an in-year balanced budget without the use of reserves. And second question on the subject of reserves, where we're maintaining a minimum level equivalent to 10% of the budget or the net operating budget. Be grateful for your view as to whether that's sort of reasonable, consistent with what you see in other organisations, and just generally what is your view on that? So yeah, 2 questions, please.
Thank you. Yeah, 2 good questions. Go in reverse order. So 10% I don't think is unreasonable. It is clearly 10% is a good proportion of an in-year spend, so provides the council with good cover in an emergency. Governmental advice in the last 5 years or so has been not to hold excessive levels of reserves, and clearly 10% doesn't fall in that bracket, and therefore I think it's not unreasonable. I mean, Ian sets the level, it's Ian's view, but from an auditor perspective, we are comfortable that it provides the level of cover that a council of this size and with that level of net expenditure would need. Balancing the budget is, again, not quite a science or an art, but clearly if holding high levels of reserves is unwarranted and brings attention from central government, and those reserves are there for a rainy day, when you exit a period of austerity, which every council has had, going through full transformation and making significant savings are hard and need a lead-in time. So I don't see that the use of reserves is not merited where need to be, as long as a medium-term financial plan identifies future savings needs and then builds plans up where savings are identified over the 3 to 5 year period, and then the council achieves that level of savings going forward. So clearly you can't run them down anywhere beneath that 10% minimum level. But equally, I think revising and reviewing earmark reserves on a good cycle is a good discipline to have, because you earmark it based on a policy decision at a point in time. If you change a policy decision or that earmark reserve isn't needed, then you should consider how it can otherwise be used for the best effect of council taxpayer of the area. So in combination, we are comfortable and I'm satisfied.
Can I just come back with just for clarity, over what time period are you judging financial sustainability?
Over the life of a medium-term financial plan, so 3 to 5, well, the 3 to 5 year period.
Members, any further comments, questions on this report? If not, we move forward to item 7, which is the external audit plan for 2023-24. And again, Mark.
Thank you. So done with the backward looking year of 22-23, looking into the audit plan for 23-24. So pull out some key messages for you. So I'm going off my page numbers, I'm afraid. So page 10 is our materiality level. So I think as a committee, good news that we're taking both a consistent approach with consistent levels. So our consistent basis is 2% of gross expenditure as our performance materiality levels. So that will give a materiality level of £811,000 for the council as a single entity and 1.5 million for the group audit. Our tolerable error drives the extent to which we use sample sizes and can get the assurance that we need that material errors would not be within the population, and we have a range that we can use between 50% and 75%. So setting it at 75% is the upper end of that range, and that reflects the historic good sets of accounts that we've audited with low levels of errors and no significant changes to any of the underlying systems or control environment. And then our nominal level for reporting to you is set at 5% of materiality. So we're reporting to you in our audit results report in November any audit differences above 41,000 for the council as a single entity and above 75,000 for the group audit. So you can get a sense of any level of error across the whole draft financial statements put for audit. On pages 8 and 9, we've got a risk summary table. And again, as a committee, I think you can take assurance of a very stable audit environment. So there's no change in audit focus. So the grey nature of that table determines that there's a consistent basis of risk. There's no red, amber or greens for a change of risk. So that's back to the 21-22 audit plan. So we have 2 fraud risks in there, which we would have in any council audit. We have no significant risks. And you remember that significant risks are ones where there's a material balance and it's likely to be wrong. So not having any is clearly good news and links back to my comment about 75% being our upper end of the range. And then we have 5 inherent risks, which you'll remember are material but unlikely to happen, but we still clearly need assurance over them being materially stated. So a consistent risk basis for the year, which clearly drives a consistent audit programme of work. Then on page 26, we set out our value for money risks. This is hot on the heels of our interim report, which was the previous agenda item, and to date we haven't identified any significant risks of weakness, though clearly that work will continue through the audit. Page 34, we set out our approach to the group audit, and it is the same group scoping as in prior years. So we have 2 full scope audits based on both size and on risk, and there's a table on page 35 that sets out those characteristics. So the 2 full scope audits are the council as a single entity and East Cambridgeshire Trading Company, and then the lower risk entity being East Cambridgeshire Street Scene being specific scope. So for those 2 latter audits, we will issue, or we have issued, group instructions to the auditor, and they will perform their audit of those subsidiaries and then provide onward assurance to us about the specific balances that we require assurance over. Then in terms of the timeline on page 40, so through discussions with Ian and Anne, we are starting the audit on Monday, I think. So green lighted to go, and then it will run through to the end of September with the view of bringing our audit results report to you in November. Clearly, with the context I provided up front about when the legislation is laid to enable us to sign 22-23 will dictate when we can then sign 23-24, because they have to be signed in sequential order. So we may sit in that slight holding pattern for a while until we know what that date is. But from our view, we want to do all the audit work, report to you as a committee, all the results of it, and then just sit and wait, as opposed to adding any time into the length of the audit. Then in terms of audit fees on page 47, 2023-24 is the first year of the new contract that public sector audit appointments have let, and which you are a part of, and part of that contract tendering process did see national audit prices increase by circa 150%, which is why there's such a significant numeric increase, and that increase does reflect some of the audit burden and regulatory requirements on audit firms that we have been talking about with you in previous years, which have driven variations to the audit fee. So they're the clear key messages, but clearly it's a 56 or so page report, so you may have some questions, so happy to take those.
Thank you, Mark. Very comprehensive introduction. Members, any comments, questions for Mark? Councillor Horgan.
Thank you, Chair. I've noted down 4 questions in total. I'll ask them one at a time rather than ask you to try and remember them all. And also I'll convert from my page numbers to your page numbers. So first one I'm looking at is my page number 55, your report page 21. Entitled Other Areas of Audit Focus. Just wanted to understand a bit more of the in the left-hand column. We identified a number of audit differences in this area as part of our 21-22 audit. Just wonder if you could expand on that at all in any way, what the differences were and what do we understand from that comment, please?
So without having the exact detail before me, but it's in our audit results report from that year, there were a number of consolidation differences coming through, some of which were because the audit of the subsidiary companies highlighted audit differences at their end that then needed to be consolidated into the group account. So those were some of them, and they're timing differences and slightly out of your control, given they are audited separately to you. But there were, I think from memory, and I looked at Anne maybe to correct me if I'm wrong, but there were some differences in the way the consolidation spreadsheet worked that we identified that then flowed through into the group accounts, which we corrected or identified in the spreadsheet and corrected, that then made the group accounts correct. And clearly we need to just ensure that those, or both timing differences and any consolidation differences aren't there in this year.
Well, there we are. Good, it worked. Light went out. Okay, so what I'm understanding is there was an alignment in terms of the way things are being reported so that the proper comparisons can be made. That's my understanding of what I've heard you say. Is that very far from the situation?
I think that is correct, yes. I'm just trying to get the audit results report so I can see if there's any more detail. But maybe we can do the next question. We can come back to that one while I.
Right, my next one's on our page 67, your page 33. It's entitled Audit Process Overview. And it was the statement around you will seek yeah, just get this right. Okay, so you're not going to test key controls. And then you go on to say that it's a fully substantive approach. And I just want to understand, to me, a substantive approach would normally include checking the key controls, but you've said that you're not going to. I just wanted to understand the rationale behind that.
Sure. So an audit approach can either be controls based with top-up substantive testing. It can be 100% substantive testing with no controls. They're the two primary approaches. Where there are a significant number of IT systems of which councils or all local government authorities have a plethora, substantive audit approach of testing back to invoices is the most efficient audit approach to do so, because otherwise you have to gain significant assurance over the full operating nature of not only the controls in the system, but the IT environment which surrounds it, which is all access controls and IT security controls and all of that entails, and that requires clearly specialist resource to do so, and that makes it an inefficient audit approach when you can do just testing back to general ledger and invoices. All audits, though, do have to have an understanding of the IT environment, so do need to walk through those systems to make sure the flow to the end point at which you can substantively test is in line with understanding. So that is still part of it. And clearly understanding the whole environment and that you have an appropriate IT environment that supports it is part of the audit process, though it isn't tested in detail.
That's fine. Obviously,
Councillor Canadian just come in.
Another thing just to mention is that our internal audit do a lot of tests on the key controls as well. So it's not as if they're not being tested, it's just being tested by a different regime.
Yeah, quite so. But obviously, I just wanted to get some assurance as to the confidence in the approach taken and the rationale behind it. But thank you, I'm satisfied. I move on now to my third question, nearly there. Our page 69, your page 35. And again, it's just a clarification question. On the right-hand side, where you've got current year rationale for scoping. Can you give me some understanding about East Cambs Trading Company, size yes, risk no, and East Cam Street Scene, size no, risk yes? I'm more interested in the no's than the yeses. Let's put it like that.
No, indeed. I think it's fair to say that any subsidiary that is material by size would automatically be in scope and therefore drives probably at least full specific scope, if not full scope procedures, of which East Cambs Trading Company is, because it has the potential to have a material impact if it is wrong on consolidation. So that drives the risk for that. You could then not be material on size, but there could be specific balances or quantitative or qualitative considerations for another organisation that impacts the group accounts that you need to be cognizant of. So East Cambs Street Scene isn't significant by size in terms of materiality, but there are some specific balances in there which then are key to consider. So it gets scoped in on that basis, but only at the specific scope nature, because we only need assurance over individual balances where there is that risk.
Thank you. Last one in this item. I'm moving now on to our page 88, and that translates to your page 54. And again, this is going to be a little bit of crystal ball gazing, which I apologise for unreservedly. But obviously the dates that you're giving here, we appreciate the background as to the circumstances of what's going on. Just wanted to understand how confident you were at this stage of achieving those dates.
So the October 24 has now moved to November 24 with the update to the committee timetable. So just to bear that in mind, but sitting here, we are confident as our team is fully resourced, our audit is properly planned, the audit plan is here today, setting out what our approach to the audit is. Draft accounts have been published by the council, all the portal requests that support the working papers supporting those accounts are online, and the audit is ready to go on Monday, and both Ian and Anne have been supportive and available in terms of supporting the audit while we're here or remotely doing the audit. So confident that the audit results report will be here in November with you. Clearly, part of the context was might not be able to sign that day or the day after. That's depending on the legislation that surrounds the whole local audit market currently.
Thank you, Chair. And sadly, I won't be here personally in November. I shall be at a wedding in New Zealand. Not mine, I hasten to add, but I'm sure it'll be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have located the answer to the question on group accounts. So there was updates following updates to the subsidiary accounts, as I said, so timing difference, as you referred to. And then there were some updates to the group cash flow statement that impacted the net surplus and deficit on the provision of services due to the spreadsheet issue that I also referenced behind the scenes. So they were the two that drove that inherent risk.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen.
I have three questions, and I'll follow my colleague's lead and ask them one at a time. Firstly, on our page 44, your page 10, materiality. I've worked with many external auditors over the years, but this is the first time I've seen materiality distinguished between planning and performance materiality. And I haven't quite understood the practical difference between those two. Could you just clarify that for me?
So it may well be terminology, and EY speak for this, but planning materiality is the overall high-level materiality above which we would be unable to give a true and fair opinion if there were errors. So that is a key driver. Performance materiality is then a subset of that, and by testing to either the 50% or 75% level of materiality, statistically, that is how you get sufficient assurance that there is no material uncorrected difference within the accounts. So that drives testing thresholds.
Thank you, that made sense. Second question, and this has been touched on already, but until you're signed off on 22-23, the opening balances in 23-24 are not confirmed. I'm just a bit worried about the risks to the council and the audit process that we might not be able to sign off or give opinion on 23-24. Could you comment on whether the EY approach is a firm-specific one, or are all auditors doing that? And how can this risk to the council be mitigated?
So the approach is a sector-wide approach. It's not EY specific, though clearly different audit firms are in different positions with their portfolio of audits. What you may not have been aware of, given your more recent appointment, is that if legislation dictates a backstop date, and let's use 30th of September just for example purposes, then that would mean, because we couldn't conclude an audit by that date for you in 22-23, that audit would have a disclaimed audit opinion on it, linked to the legislation driving a backstop. Now, clearly that means there is no audit assurance over closing balances, as you say, which then flows into opening balances for 23-24. What is little understood, I think, in the sector, and probably just worth bringing out, is that it generally takes 3 audit cycles to unwind a modified audit opinion, of which a disclaimed opinion is one, because you do have an opening balance issue, then you have a comparative issue. So you'd have 3 sets of audit accounts with a modified opinion of type. So the government's proposals are called reset and recovery. So the reset is to have a backstop date to get rid of the backlog by the 30th of September in my example, and then there's going to be a recovery phase which is going to be multi-year to rebuild assurance over the years you didn't have an audit. So you get to a position where you have assurance over the opening balances and you can get rid of the disclaimer over the year-end balances for that year. It's called recovery because there is clearly a finite amount of audit resource, and you can't do 2 years of audit in 1 year, otherwise we'd have done that 2 years ago. So this is about rebuilding it over an appropriate period of time that gets the sector back to a position where audits are generally unqualified or unmodified, as opposed to the majority being in that position.
Yeah, thank you. I understand that. And as I was saying earlier, I don't think that's something we have a lot of ability to influence. And perhaps this committee can help the council with understanding that, and indeed the wider public. So I'll move on to my third question then, I think, which is around the use of data analytics, which I was pleased to see, because that is a way of getting maximum coverage for in the most efficient way. But the document still talks about undertaking a fully substantive audit, and for me, those two things, don't quite reconcile. And the reason for raising it is to seek assurance that we are managing the audit as efficiently as possible, and therefore the cost to the council, the disruption to the council is sort of minimised. So, so the question is, why do the data analytics not enable you to reduce the amount of substantive testing?
So data analytics is a key part of our EY approach. And data analytics allows us to get down to the minimum level of substantive testing that is required to gain sufficient assurance with those materiality levels that we set out. The beauty of data analytics is it captures 100% of the population of transactions in a year and enables us to use clever IT tools that are beyond me to stratify them in ways of risk and size that allows you to have key items for testing, which then minimizes your residual sample that you need to test. So it's those techniques that bring it down to the minimum level that we are operating at. So that is the efficiency that's inbuilt to the data analytic program and provides you with assurance because we're taking 100% of your transactions in a year and being able to filter them through.
Thank you, Mark. Anything further? If not, thank you very much. Welcome to leave, or you're welcome to stay. Right, members, we now move on to agenda item number 8, which is the draft statement of accounts. And can I ask Ian Smith to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to talk specifically about the accounts. The accounts are here. Historically, as a council, we haven't provided the committee with our draft accounts, but we did for the first time last year, and I think it's good practice to continue to do so. We published our draft accounts by the 31st of May deadline, as required by legislation, and they're obviously now subject to audit to the timetable that Mark's discussed. And, you know, I was going to also raise, but Mark has already done so, that while the substantive audit work is now taking place, the ability of external audit to sign off these accounts will be impacted by the backstop date, and obviously the legislation around that. So these are the draft accounts which have been produced, and you know, clearly if members have any comments or questions on the statement of accounts, we can answer those. But basically, these are the accounts which are handed over to Mark and his team to pull apart and to find any errors or anything like that, which I'm sure they won't, but he says confidently. But yeah, this is the draft set of accounts which is open for audit. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. From the chair, I'll propose the recommendation as set out in 2.1 in the report. But before doing that, just can I, on a point of principle really, we're asked to note this report. Going forward, can we sort of change recommendations so that we're commenting on or discussing more, rather than just, it looks like we're just sort of rubber stamping reports, when in fact what we do is question and discuss. So could we change the templates basically? Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you. Members, do we have comments, questions for Ian? Stephen?
Firstly, just to endorse what you just said, and I think the approach I've used in my sort of day job on this has been to ask committees to endorse things. So just to support that, I don't think we're just here to note items. I just want to comment really. When I was a local government chief finance officer, it was a source of immense professional frustration. The accounting rules we had to follow were opaque and prevented the production of a clear set of accounts that was understandable to the public. I see that 10 years on, the situation's not improved very much. But once again, I think that's beyond our control. I've been through these accounts in detail, and within the constraints of the accounting rules, I think this is a well put together, internally consistent and good set of accounts, and I've not been able to break them. So I just want to sort of publicly sort of say that and commend Ian and his team for that outcome. I've already relayed to Ian some observations about some of the narrative, which is mainly around the consequence of the pension fund deficit turning into a surplus, which I think could be discussed a bit more clearly, and also the fact that we have a significant revenue and a significant capital underspend, and I think the reader of the accounts would find it useful to understand why that is, and whether that's meant some things that the council planned to do have not in practice happened, with consequent issues. But beyond that, Chair, I would be supportive of the committee in endorsing these accounts, and I think they're well put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That's very, very encouraging to hear as well from sitting in this chair. Ian, would you like to comment on any of that?
I mean, really very grateful for comments about the structure of accounting and over in the gallery over there, or whatever you want to call it, is the person who pulls them together for us and has to take all the credit. So, but yeah, thank you for the comment.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions? I know Councillor Horgan's also already submitted some comments. And just if anybody else has anything else to submit, please get them to Ian as soon as possible, really. Do we need to debate any further? I don't think so. Right, thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 9, which is the draft annual governance statement for 2023-24. Can I ask John Hill, Chief Executive, to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chairman. As a matter of a reminder, this is part of a two-stage process for the committee. As much as a reminder and also for Stephen's benefit and welcome, of course, we being the committee, you being the committee, receive a first draft and agree a consultation timetable, which is detailed in the report, which allows every member to put comments and any questions which are reported back through to the next meeting of the committee, along with a final draft, and including an explanation where members' comments have not been included in that final draft. In addition, you'll see there's the appendices that we introduced last year, which was the report on actions, and members certainly found that very useful. And again, I would ask for any further comments to that as part of the consultation process. The timetable for all members and substitutes the committee to report and give me any comments is the 13th of September, and it's detailed in paragraph 4.1. I have, thank you very much, Councillor Horgan, received a number of comments which will be included and reported back in that final draft. I think that's all I need to add at this stage, and obviously we'll have a much fuller discussion at the next meeting when you receive the final draft. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, John. Again, from the chair, I'll propose the recommendation that we've just been hearing about, that we do formally consult with members and substitutes of the committee. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Horgan.
Yep, very pleased to do that, especially as my comments have already been acknowledged. Thank you.
Councillor Horgan, can I just confirm with you that one of those comments might be the need to, or the recommendation to highlight the appointment of Stephen as our independent member?
Only that for completeness purposes, yes, it was just a matter of advertising this exceptional addition to our ranks.
Thank you, Councillor Horgan. Right, members, any further comments or questions? Ian?
Just to say that because of the change in committee date, the recommendation probably needs changing to November rather than October.
Yeah. Well spotted, Ian. Members, anything further? In that case, let's move on to agenda item number, thank you, John. Move on to agenda item number 10 and information governance annual report. And can I ask Maggie Camp to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chairman. This is just the annual government information governance report, which covers freedom of information requests, the council's data protection, subject access requests, what we've received and what we've dealt with. Also any data breaches, an update just briefly there on data protection training, which has now been carried out. And I can report that this year we've had 100% completion rate for staff, and the transparency code, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Maggie. Members, can I have a proposal and seconder for the recommendation set out in 2.1 of the report?
Propose.
Thank you, councillor. And the seconder? Councillor Horgan. Members, any further comments or questions? Stephen?
Thank you. All good and clear. I mean, from the information here, everything's sort of working well and as expected. The report doesn't comment on cybersecurity more generally, which I've always felt to be part of information governance. That may not be the case here, in which case, please say so. But I was wondering how the committee would get assurance that our cybersecurity arrangements are sort of working well.
I can, if members would like me to, I could include that in the annual report. If that is something that members would like.
I
And
think
can
that would be
obviously liaise
helpful.
with the ICT manager.
Yeah.
Thank you, because I think a hacking event or similar would likely result in a much more material data breach than perhaps an individual officer's action. So I'd welcome that. Thank you.
Members, anything further?
Would you like to?
Shall we?
No,
Better-
just a note, sorry.
Yeah. Again, can we, the same point as I made earlier, rather than just noting what we discussed.
Oh, right, yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
and, but also to add in that bit that we've just discussed into the recommendation for the minutes.
Okay.
You happy with that, councillors Beckett and Org? Thank you. Anything further on this item? In which case, thank you, Maggie. We'll move on to agenda item 11 on the opening shots in the Rachel Ashley Corn Show. Internal audit annual report and opinion for 2023-24. Rachel, can I ask you to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to do so. So at the end of each financial year, under the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, I, as your Head of Internal Audit, am required to provide an annual opinion on the Council's governance, risk and control framework. So that is primarily based on the outcomes of internal audit work, so what we found through the audits that we've performed during the year, and that's why we need to make sure we have a risk-based internal audit plan, as well as previously discussed. So the report today is provided in Appendix A from pages 231 onwards. It provides a full copy of that annual report and opinion for 2023-24. So the opinion itself is set out on page 233 of the papers. It sets out the assurance opinion that I've given for the financial year, and then goes into a little bit more depth around some of the different areas in terms of risk, internal control and financial controls in particular. So the assurance opinion given is of moderate assurance. So this is consistent with the assurance levels given in previous years, albeit a different definition and terminology as we agreed under the Internal Audit Charter for 23-24. So the rest of the report, as I say, sets out the basis for that moderate assurance opinion. So it sets out within there the outcomes of those audit opinions, of audit the assurances that we've delivered during the year. So table 3 on page 237 of your papers provides a breakdown of all of the audit assignments that have been delivered throughout the year and the assurance opinion that's been given in relation to each of those. So just to note, the members of the committee have received the majority of those reports already as part of my regular progress reporting, and anything that was finalised since the last committee meeting is included in the progress report also on the agenda today. So also informing my audit opinion is the third-party assurance that I receive in relation to the Council's Revenues and Benefits Service, which is provided by Anglia Revenues Partnership. So on that basis, I have included the assurance outcomes from those on page 238 of the papers, which were all of that adequate, reasonable, which I would say is equivalent to our moderate assurance rating. That is slightly lower than we've seen in previous years. We're usually around, of the 4, usually we have 2 that are more of the good category and 2 of adequate and reasonable. And I've reflected that within the text, within my opinion box at the start of the report as well. Other things that impact on my assurance opinion are the implementation of audit recommendations. So on table 4 and page 239 of the pack, I'm just giving you an overview of the implementation of actions, because as the head of internal audit, giving my opinion, if we've identified areas of weakness but prompt action has been taken, that's a good source of assurance for me that the audit process is working effectively and management are addressing any weaknesses in controls. So on that basis, at the time of the snapshot at the end of March 2024, we'd have 8 recommendations, which were within the 3 months overdue bracket and 1 of over 3 months. Just to note, I won't go into detail around those particular actions because we do have an updated position for you in the next committee agenda item. But this was a snapshot, as I say, as at the end of March 2024. I've also mentioned within the report other sources of assurance that I take into consideration, including the Council's public sector network compliance, which is referenced on page 239. And obviously the opinion, as I say, is based on the overall assurance ratings. Page 235 provides you with a breakdown and also a comparator with the previous financial year as well. It is always difficult to do that direct comparison because every year we are performing different audits, so it's not a direct comparison. But as you can see this year, we did have the first in a number of years, a limited assurance opinion, which is reflected again within that overall assurance opinion. But we also recognise the action that's been taken in that area in a prompt manner as well. So the rest of the report also reflects on the delivery of the internal audit plan and the performance of internal audit ourselves against the public sector internal audit standards, the feedback from audit assignments in table 5 and other areas of added value from your internal audit service as well. So I'm happy to take questions, Chair, on any of the detail within the report. That's just a quick run through of the key sections. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. From the chair, I will propose a recommendation. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. Right, before I throw open, I guess I'm going to jump in before anybody else does. Clearly, we have in front of us a moderate response. Any views on how we're going to improve that for one point? And secondly, just on ARP, and it might be directed to Ian as well as yourself, Rachel. If the things we're identifying with ARP, I would expect the committee to support me in saying that we do have a representative on the board of ARP, and can we make sure that that individual is fully briefed on any concerns we might have with controls at ARP. Right, members, any further comments or questions?
My 2 points are exactly those, Chair, so nothing to add. It's a good and clear report, and clearly the ARP situation is one that requires escalation, but you've covered that, so thank you.
Councillor Horgan.
Yeah, you pinched my first question. Unfortunately, it started to remind me a little bit of my early school reports. Must try harder, can do better. What was it? Condemned by faint praise. I think people have a sensitivity to the phrase moderate with regards to assurance. I'm guessing this is based predominantly on table 3 on page 237. Yeah, so we've had the PCI DSS red situation for a little while now. Are we making progress in your opinion in that area or not?
Rachel, over to you.
Through you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to take that. So the audit was performed and finalised in October, so it's just been on there. So it hasn't been reperformed. It has just, that was the outcome of the audit at that time. So just to reassure you on that. In terms of the action plan that came out of the audit, I know that officers have been progressing that, and I believe all of the actions are either progressing into advanced stages or complete at this stage. So that's, again, something, as I say, gives me assurance that where we have identified areas of weaknesses have been addressed in a prompt manner, and that all feeds into the assurance rating as well. So yes, that's just to give you some reassurance on the actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to confirm, it's read on this report, as Rachel said, because at the time they wrote the report, there was limited assurance since then, the recommendations have all been implemented and, have been, what we've done has been cleared with Rachel's colleagues that they have, all the issues have been resolved and there is no ongoing issues at this point.
Thank you. I look forward to a higher score at a future report. Super. Again, this just might be terminology, words. I'm looking on page 233 and under risk management, which is about 2/3, 3/4 down the page. This is just me, I suspect, but I'm going to say it anyway. Assessing and managing risks have remained generally consistent. Now, when you use the word consistent, I won't tell you the whole joke, but basically the words even thickness comes to mind as to the definition of consistent. And I'm sure that's not the case here, but generally consistent, it means if we were always bad, we've stayed bad. If we're always good, we've stayed good. But it doesn't actually help me understand whether we are good or bad. Is there a way of actually helping me understand what consistent means in this context, please?
Through you, Chair. So obviously this all feeds into the wider opinion at the start. So if we had any concerns around the risk management process, we would be identifying that either through the fact that we're not able to deliver a risk-based audit plan because we don't have a risk approach to base it upon, or if we'd raised issues in previous years that hadn't been addressed as well. So generally, we haven't raised any concerns previously, and that remains the position. I think when we say generally consistent, the processes have remained generally the same, but I do think there has been some improvement. I think we are continuing to refine the risk management process. Over the last 18 months, there's been additional columns in terms of assurance mapping as well. So I'm satisfied there's nothing I need to raise in terms of an exceptional concern in relation to risk management processes. I suppose that's one of the comments that I'd make. Also, just to reference the work that we do as that rolling risk register entry review that we do as well, which also helps to inform that. So if that had highlighted any areas of concern, that's where I would be referencing that as well within this report. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've already answered my third question as well, where like the chair, we're always looking for ways to improve, do better, I was minded on page 235 with the score of 7 risk-based audits at moderate. Presumably that drives a certain assessment of the overall state of things, and we want those numbers to move left, I guess, on that drawing on table 1. Thank you.
Anything further to add, Rachel?
No, I think, and I just support that comment really, that obviously the more that moves to the left, the higher the overall assurance opinion would be. I would just say again that it's difficult sometimes to do that compare and contrast, and sometimes I speak to committees about comparable opinions from other local authorities as well. And again, you're not comparing like for like because there's different audits in every audit plan. So you may have some more tricky audits which may have a greater risk exposure than others in one year than in another, for example. So I also think if you were having the majority say of audits coming out with substantial assurance, I'd be beginning to question whether we're looking in the right areas as well, whether we're actually drilling into the right areas and shedding light on those areas of risk. So whilst we'd like to see more moving to the left, obviously that just provides a little bit of context. Just to also mention, that's the reason why in table 3 as well, that we've added within our assurance opinion, we don't just give one opinion, we do split it into those 3 categories. And that organisational impact column, that third element of our opinion, really gives you an idea as to whether or not there's any implication from that audit on my annual assurance opinion. So anything that's of a medium does have some implication for my overall assurance opinion. So that just helps, again, just to give you a little bit of context around those. So hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
So I did have a question for all. Page 241. You're maintaining a fraud reporting mailbox. Have you had anything in that mailbox? And how is that publicised so that people know to use it?
Through you, Chair.
Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of publicising, we do a fraud awareness week every November to tie in with the International Fraud Awareness Week, where we do publicise on social media and the website and things to make sure that that's publicised. We've also set up a new page on the website which guides people through how to report different types of fraud as well. So things like tenancy fraud for social housing, just to make sure they're routed to the right place. Revenues and benefits, for example, go into DWP. But then there are a number of areas where the reporting is to our fraud mailbox, which is checked every day. We don't get many referrals, I must say. I think we've had less than 5, I think, since it was set up. So there's not, we've not been overwhelmed with referrals, but obviously most of as my experience at other local authorities is where you do have a revenues and benefits service in-house, or you have housing stock, that tends to be the highest number of referrals. So it may be that we are directing them to the right route through the website and they are just making those elsewhere. If we were having regular activity, I would start giving stats in here, but to be honest, it's such a low level of activity. I've not gone into detail, and obviously we have to be careful when there's such a small number as well, that they are anonymous as well, I suppose. So.
Thank you. Anything further, members? Right, if not, we move on to agenda item 12. Rachel, your internal audit progress report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this provides the latest update on the outcome of internal audit assignments since the last committee update. So it's in the usual format that members of the committee will be familiar with. So section 2.3 from page 248 of the pack provides the overview of those audits which have been finalised during the period. These have been, as I say, if they related to 23-24 work, have been reflected already within the annual report as well in terms of those outcomes. But just running briefly through those reports that have been finalised. The first was in relation to the accounts payable system, so one of our key financial systems, which we review on an annual basis, and we just try to alter the scope slightly each year so we can give a deep dive into some of those key controls within the payments processes. So generally, we've given a substantial assurance opinion on the control environment, so no areas to highlight in terms of the design of the controls. And in relation to compliance, again, good levels of compliance with those key controls and the segregation of duties around raising, authorising and approving payments and processing of those. So no areas of concern highlighted there in relation to those key controls. The only areas that we have identified, just to make sure that these are suitably addressed, we have flagged during the sample testing that there was a tendency within some of the orders that have been raised that they haven't been raised in advance of the invoice being raised, which suggests that there's some retrospective approvals on commitments. We also identified one particular budget code where the financial regulations were essentially not being applied in practice in approving values below £1,000. So obviously some low risk findings overall, but we've just brought the compliance opinion down to good overall. The second was in relation to the governance of trading companies. So I brought the previous report on the street scene company to the previous audit committee meeting. This report has since been finalised in relation to the East Cambridgeshire Trading Company. So similar in terms of findings, that generally we're happy with the governance framework that was in place, and the review that we conducted was basically assessing against key elements of the SIPFA guidance on local authority owned companies. We used that as an example of good practice. So we made some recommendations around training and conflict of interest protocol to be documented, for example, and also formalising some of the risk management arrangements. But overall, we've given that moderate assurance on the control environment, subject to some of those, the documentation of some of those controls, and a good level of compliance and medium organisational impact given some of the risks associated with the companies. And the third was in relation to private sector housing enforcement. So this was an audit area that we hadn't focused on previously. And it's an area that is quite high on a national agenda with some changes in terms of the standards that we expect to be applied around things like damp and mould and supporting tenants. So overall, again, we were happy that there was generally a system of controls that we'd expect to see. The reason we've had to give a moderate assurance opinion on the control environment was around the lack of a strategy and strategic plan for private sector housing. So that's the key recommendation coming from the audit, is around documenting that, and also documenting operating procedures to support that operation in practice as well. So that reflects in the moderate assurance opinion for the environment, good level for compliance and low organisational impact overall. I've also able to confirm that since the last meeting, we've had 15 audit recommendations, agreed actions have been implemented by officers, and there is now only one recommendation which remains overdue, which is of a medium priority and is detailed in table 3 on page 256 of the pack with the latest update. And as you can see from the update, some of it has actually been implemented, but it's around completing that next stage of the action as well. So we'll continue to monitor that and report back to future meetings. We've also completed the latest of the rolling real-time risk reviews, which is covered in section 2.5 on page 251 and 252. And full details are provided in table 4 of the appendix as well from page 257. So I don't intend to go through that in detail, and there were no recommendations coming out of that review at that time. So the only other thing to mention is table 1 on page 253 provides the 2024-25 internal audit plan and just shows you the status of each of the assignments as at the time of producing this report. Some of those assignments have progressed since. We've had a draft report issued on one of those audits since I produced this update, and obviously we'll continue to deliver that and update at a future meeting. So that's a run through again of the key sections of the report, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions on the detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Again, from the chair, I propose a recommendation set out in 2.1. Can we have a seconder for the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Horgan. Members, comments or questions for Rachel on this report? Steve?
Thank you. All good and clear. The thing that caught my eye was on page 251 regarding the moderate's opinion on private sector housing enforcement due to a lack of strategy. And when I was reading the housing risk item on page 276, there didn't seem to be any awareness or acknowledgement that there isn't a strategy. It just feels like there's a bit of a disconnect, and it just feels quite serious to me. So I just wonder, as an audit committee, whether we should be encouraging that this is addressed, but also from a risk management point of view, I'd expect to see this captured somehow. Going to page 276 there on the risk.
Ian, as chairman of the risk group, can you take that on board, please?
Yeah, happy to note that and discuss at the next meeting of the board. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Anything further on this one? If not, we'll move on to item 13, which is internal audit standards, global internal audit standards. Rachel, over to you again, please.
Thank you, Chair. So my third and final item today is just a briefing really on the global internal audit standards. So I regularly refer to the public sector internal audit standards during my reports to this committee. So I just wanted to give you the early heads up really that this is on the horizon, and particularly to understand some of the implications for the role of the audit committee, so that you can take those on board and hopefully provide further detail later in the year. So the global internal audit standards have been produced following extensive consultation over the last year. They are due to come into force from January 2025, but the advice that we've received, and I was actually at a meeting yesterday with the lead governance officer for SIPFA, who did advise that actually they're expecting it to be applied in the public sector from April 2025 to fit in with the new financial years, which probably makes sense. in practice as well. We are also awaiting, and that's one of the reasons we're pressing the officer from SIPFA around the guidance we're expecting to receive on how we actually apply these standards. Because as I've made reference within this report, there are a number of elements of those global internal audit standards that are not directly applicable and cannot really be clearly applied in the public sector, and particularly in local government. And SIPFA are due to be providing some guidance, particularly on the domain 3, which is referenced within this paper, on how we apply that within a local government setting. So just taking an example, so the standards as they're drafted include things like the performance management of the head of internal audit, which in a local government sector wouldn't be appropriate. It's not the role of the audit committee to be involved in staff management. So they're looking at how that would be applied in practice and what our equivalent standard would be. We're not expecting a revised public sector internal audit standard based on the guidance from SIPFA at this point. We're just expecting some supplementary guidance from them on how we apply the global internal audit standards. So I am also still awaiting that guidance. So this is based purely on the information that we have to date. What I would suggest, if the committee are in agreement, is that I would bring back further updates during the year and potentially have a pre-committee session, perhaps outside of a formal meeting, just to give a bit more of a detailed briefing once we get that further guidance. For example, if we get new guidance from SIPFA on the role of the audit committee, for example, which we had been the basis for our previous self-assessment of the committee, I would also share that with the committee members, but it may be worth having that workshop style session outside of a committee meeting as well, which I'd be happy to do perhaps in the autumn time once we've got some further information. I was advised by SIPFA yesterday that they expect to go out to consultation on some guidance at the end, by the end of September, hopefully. So on that basis, and perhaps in the November meeting, may be a good time to do a pre-committee session on that. So I've just, as I say, presented it as it is at the moment of some of the key points, and I'll provide further updates as we get them. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Again, from the chair, I'll propose the recommendation. Can I have a seconder for the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Pettit. Members, any comments or questions to Rachel on this one? Stephen?
Thank you. Yeah, all good and clear. Thank you. Just two questions. Could you explain to us the concept of professional scepticism?
Yeah, can do through you, Chair. I suppose from my perspective as an auditor, we don't take things at face value. Everything that we conclude must be evidence-based. So we don't make assumptions about how we understand things to work. And I suppose in practice, how we exercise this and demonstrate it, we don't have the same auditor auditing the same system constantly every year. There's that element of bringing other people in so they don't get too comfortable, I suppose, in understanding a system and making assumptions about how it works. I think it's also really important that we have a robust quality assurance process as well within the internal audit process. So every audit report that is issued is reviewed by me across all of the councils that I work with. And I also review the working papers as well. So we do have quite a strong quality assurance process. And that's at the point that I would then question if something isn't evidence-based, we haven't got something to support it. So it's that professional scepticism. We don't take anything at face value without the evidence to back it up.
Cool.
That's very reassuring. Secondly and finally, at section 4.3, there's a long list of things that the audit committee should be doing. And at this point, do you think there are any obvious sort of gaps or weaknesses and any risks that we might not fulfil this list?
Rachel?
Yep, through you, Chair. So I think it's actually quite positive to note that some of the requirements in here were good practice, I suppose recommended practice, but not necessary under the previous standards, not mandatory. So things like having a private meeting with the Chief Audit Executive, doing the report to the board, I suppose, in terms of the annual reports and things. So a lot of these things are things that this audit committee has actually picked up as part of the recent self-assessment and put into place. So we have had a private meeting of audit committee members and myself and external audit outside of these meetings as well. So I'm happy that generally I think that the key points are being covered. I think once we get that additional guidance around what that really looks like for a local government audit committee, that will be helpful to help us apply some of that in practice as well.
It's good to know. Thank you.
Members, anything further on this one? No, thank you very much. In which case we thank you, Rachel. which case we move on to agenda item 14, Corporate Risk Management Monitoring Report. Ian, can I ask you to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. The Risk Management Group has had 2 meetings since we last reported to committee. The outcome of those meetings is detailed in the Appendix 2 of the report, and the main changes from the previous version you had are detailed in Appendix 1 of the report. I'm happy to take any comments members have about any of the scoring of the risks and take those away for further discussion at future risk management groups. Not in the paper, but also wanted to say that there is now a risk management section on the council's internet site, which has details the risk management process and framework, and also the latest risk register.
Thank you, Ian. Right, can I have a proposal and second for the recommendation as set out? Thank you, Councillor Horgan, and Councillor Pettit seconds. Thank you. Members, comments or questions to Ian? Councillor Horgan.
Yes, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Ian for pointing out that there is a very good web page on the council website, which I am now able to find, which includes the latest risk register, risk policy, and risk management framework. For transparency purposes and public awareness, I think it's essential to have that information in the public domain, and that's been added now. So that's good to know. I've just got a couple of very hopefully short questions, but a new one came up with regards to a webinar that I attended only this morning, but I'll come back to that in a second. On page 280, on the right-hand side, in the in the actions column, it says confirmation that EDC will not get named in TA, and I was just wondering what TA stood for. It's page 280, about halfway down the page on the right-hand side.
I can't say, I was repeat that. I can't remember exactly what TA stand for, but it was a document which DEFRA were going to produce, which named us as we were unable, because of the way we dispose of our waste through the waste contract with the county council, the previous PFI contract, it made us, we weren't going to be compliant with some legislation, but that DEFRA backed away from that now, and they're not going to name us in that, and that was going to, it weren't just going to be East Cambridgeshire, it was going to be all the councils in Cambridgeshire being named.
Maybe you can look at your notes as to what TA stands for and update us, obviously, because I'm just a bit picky about having abbreviations used without their explanation. That would be good. And the other one is on the next page, 281 in the right-hand side under the target date for risk A8. It's got a target date of TBC. I'm just wondering when we might get a date for that.
I believe the quantity surveyor has now been appointed, but the exact date I'm not aware of yet. But again, I can find that out for a year and report back.
Yeah. That would be excellent. The other matter that came up this morning was that I attended, albeit online, a training session run by the CPCA on the new Procurement Act 2024, and having sat through that, it scared the heebie-jeebies out of me. I just wondered if, because obviously there's significant changes to guidance and the impact on policies, whether it's something that we need to consider how that might be woven into the risk management register. Just putting it out there at this moment in time.
In relation to the new Procurement Act, there is how it fits in the risk register, I'll need to consider, but in relation to what we're doing in relation to that, there is a training course for all officers on the 17th of September, which all service leads are invited to, and they can nominate other people in their teams to attend, which will be run by our procurement officer. And also, well, our procurement is, we have an SLA with the County Council for our procurement, and it'll be the person who we get through that SLA will provide the training. Also, the County Council will be updating our contract procedure rules, which are part of the Constitution, to pick up all the issues with the new Act. And so those will be going to full council for approval at some point, commensurate with the start of the Act becoming legislation.
If I might just come back, Chair, one of the questions that was asked, not by me on the webinar, but it certainly the question resonated with me was the increase in activity in the contract management side of it that is coming through, requiring a lot more staff. And so therefore, if we've got to go out and start hiring people, again, that's something that we need to take into consideration, because not only does that have an impact on whether we can deliver that part of the service, but also whether we can afford it, and that obviously the knock-on effect on our budgets as well. So anyway, I've said my piece.
Thank you. I'd say being takes back to the group that he chairs on risk management, how all that needs to be wound in to our corporate risk register. That would be good. And also that housing one from earlier. Stephen?
I've got 4 things I'd like to ask about, if that's okay, Chair. Firstly, can I just commend the format and clarity of this way of reporting risk management? I think it's really good and clear. One of the best I've seen, and I've seen quite a few. So thank you for that. I'm going to start on risk A5, which is page 278, which is the risk that the cost of living crisis will impact on the residents of East Cambridgeshire. Under key controls, I'd expect to see that we are tracking some lead indicators of deprivation around, I don't know, maybe unemployment or something, just to give us an early warning of whether or not the cost of living crisis is impacting our residents. And as that's not there, can I just ask whether in practice we are tracking lead indicators? And also as a key control, I would have thought that the sort of Housing and Council Tax Benefits Service through ARP would be a material part of in ensuring that the cost of living crisis is not unduly impacting. And again, I'd expect to see a key control about making sure that service is performing well. So perhaps just invite comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I note the comment and I'll take it away and we'll reflect on that and potentially reflect that in the future version of the register.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, risk A7 on page 280. So my eyes are drawn to this because of the red shading. And what I notice here, looking at this for the very first time, is that even after the key controls are followed, the residual risk is still at 4.4. And a likelihood of 4 means likely. So what this is saying is that even with all these controls, it is likely that this service will fail. And I think as an audit committee, we need to call that out as something that we probably don't want to tolerate, and be recommending that the council does something additional to reduce the likelihood that this service will fail.
The main reason why this remains as a red is the MRF contract is currently up for renewal, and the tender prices we have of that contract are significantly higher, very significantly higher than we're currently paying. And so therefore, as officers, we're trying to work through that, and that's why it's scored red. Clearly, as we are part of a tendering process, I don't really want to say any more than that in the public meeting.
Understood, but I think this committee has a role to advise the council or give some onward messaging, and I don't think the fact that this document says that the service is likely to fail can be left unremarked on. Perhaps, Chair, that's something you would take up with officers after the meeting, but just wanted to call that out.
Certainly, thank you for that.
Thirdly, and more briefly, on item C6, which is on page 287, fraud and corruption. I just noted the comment that the Cambridgeshire Fraud Hub was launched in March 2023 to reduce council tax fraud, and so over a year has passed. So I'm just wondering what effect has that had?
It's had a very significant impact in as much that the amount of fraud which has been identified. I can't give you actual figures, although I can provide those out away from the meeting if you would so like. But Cambridgeshire County Council are funding it, and the amount which has been identified of fraud, they are very comfortable in funding it for a further year. They're putting additional funding, which obviously highlights the fact that they think it's value for money to them to continue to fund it.
And just following on from that, just going from the local press, there's been a number of prosecutions recently that have been reported.
Thank you. And lastly, on the same page, so I was pleased to see incorporation of a risk around net zero, leaving completely to one side all of the environmental arguments and focusing purely on the risk management side. I've done a lot of work on this area in the past, and I think there is a very serious reputation risk to the council, because I think you will inevitably find that this is not a deliverable pledge based on all the work and research I've done on this. So there's a big reputational management risk. I also think there's a big financial management risk, because the cost of fulfilling net zero could be quite significant. And what I'd like to recommend is that within the actions, I would like to see the council working towards developing a cost of action plan to work out how this pledge will be delivered. And bearing in mind we have until 2036, you can then start to factor the financial implications into medium-term financial planning. Yeah, from a risk management point of view, it bothers me, but I think the sooner we get a handle on what this means in practice, the easier it will be to mitigate that risk. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Ian's made a note of that. One from me that I want to take back to the group as well, Ian, is there's various bits about planning. Might be a bit too early yet, but clearly with some of the statements coming out from the new government, I think some of these risks around planning you need to keep a close eye on. Members, anything further on this one? If not, we move to the forward agenda plan. Anybody have anything they wish to change? Do you have any changes other than that change of date? Do you have anything? Do we have anything that we need to add in? Stephen?
Just comparing this with other audit committee forward plans that I'm familiar with, a couple of things I'd suggest would need to be added. One would be something around a fraud and corruption risk assessment or self-assessment, which I imagine is done every year or two anyway, but it's not on the forward plan. That's why I query it. And secondly, I think from time to time as a committee, we might want to do sort of deep dives on some of the individual strategic risks that are highlighted. Over and above just receiving the register, we might want to, go into more detail. As whether that there's provision within the forward plan to accommodate some deep dive reviews would be a question.
Yeah, we can certainly look at that. Anything further? If not, I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you all very much for your contributions.